sun dipped low on the horizon, spilling hues of crimson and gold across the rugged landscape. The town of Silver Creek, nestled in a valley, wore a coat of apprehension. Gossipy whispers curled around the saloon and wrapped themselves around the wooden walls of homes. Folks felt it in their bones that something was coming, a storm of violence, darker than the evening sky. In the heart of that town, nestled between peeling paint and rattling shutters, stood a humble house. Inside lived a widow named Clara, her heart heavy with grief and fear. It had been 2 years since the death of her husband, a kind man who had spent his life keeping the peace. Since that day, the shadows seemed to stretch longer, and the world outside felt more dangerous. Clara's children, little Eli and brave Mary, played quietly under the watchful eye of the sun. Their laughter, once vibrant, now felt fragile, like glass hanging in the balance. One evening, as the sun slipped behind the hills, she overheard it again, the murmurs about the gangs moving in. Stories of raiders striking homes, leaving nothing but ruin. Clara's heart raced. She had seen too much sorrow to allow her children to become victims. She knew what she had to do, and her decision sent a cold chill down her spine. She entered the saloon, where men gathered like vultures over a carcass. The air was thick with smoke and whispered bravado. Clara stepped forward, her voice steady, though her heart pounded. The room fell silent, eyes darting toward her with curiosity and judgment. But Clara's determination only grew. "I have coin." Mumbles turned to laughter, but amidst the cynicism sat a man with a dusty hat and an expression as hard as the roads he rode. His name was Griffin. The stories surrounding him were as tangled as the hair on his chin. A gunslinger, feared yet respected. He was known to have a heart buried under layers of pain. He had seen too much darkness in his time. Griffin said, his voice gravelly but even. He barely shifted his gaze, studying the widow who dared approach him. "Because I don't just seek for myself," she replied, a fierceness bubbling beneath her soft exterior. "I seek for my children." He raised an eyebrow, contemplating a moment that stretched into infinity. Then with a shrug, Griffin offered a subtle, "Fine, I'll take the job." Relief washed over Clara, but with it came a wave of uncertainty. What would this man, a stranger to her, demand of her? Would he keep them safe or expose them to danger? Yet as she looked into his penetrating gaze, she felt an odd sense of trust. Days turned into weeks, and Griffin became a fixture in their lives. He didn't just guard the house, he infused it with life. He'd sit with Eli, showing him how to hold a gun, teaching him to aim, a fatherly touch in the absence of one. Mary watched in awe, her timid nature gradually giving way to courage as she absorbed the strength emanating from the man. But every evening, after the sun surrendered to the darkness, Clara would find Griffin at the porch, staring into the distance. His silence was a loud reminder of the battles he had fought, both outside and within. Clara felt the weight of his past pressing down against her heart, and she knew she had to reach him. One night she stepped onto the porch, and the moon bathed them in silver light. She asked softly. Griffin looked at her, shadows dancing across his features, and for a moment she saw the man underneath the hardened shell. "Once I lost everything I cared about." His honesty pierced her heart. As the days passed, Clara and Griffin forged a connection born from shared pain, an understanding that transcended words. They began to talk late into the night, their voices low and intimate. Clara opened up about her husband, the love they shared, and how the laughter of her children had turned into a fragile thing. Griffin shared stories of battles fought and lost, of people he could not save. Together, they carved a sanctuary of solace amidst the chaos. Then one fateful night, as the wind howled like a wild beast outside, trouble knocked at their door. A band of raiders, dark silhouettes against the moonlight, ambushed Silver Creek. They were ruthless, and their intention was clear. They sought chaos and blood. Clara felt her heart drop as the sounds of shouting and gunfire echoed in the distance. Her children, eyes wide with fear, clung to her like ivy. Griffin sprung into action, reaching for his guns, his steely determination transforming him. He commanded, eyes blazing like molten steel. Clara's voice trembled, terror clawing at her throat. "I'll protect you," he said, a promise laced with an unspoken love. He stepped out into the storm of chaos, leaving Clara standing at the threshold. Time stretched painfully as distant shots rang out. Clara's hands trembled, clutching her children close, whispering words of safety into their ears. Each moment felt like a treacherous eternity, but she knew she had to be strong for them. Then came the unmistakable sound of men shouting and the rattle of guns falling silent. A shadow moved through the dark and Clara's heart lurched. Had he been hurt? Was he, too, another casualty of this brutal night? But then Griffin appeared in the doorframe, dust-covered but undefeated. He ushered her and the children out into the night. He looked over his shoulder, urgency lining his face. Clara could see the tightening of his jaw, each breath carrying the weight of his responsibility. They ran through the winding paths of Silver Creek, aimless yet instinctual. Clara's heart drummed a fearsome rhythm. She felt the warmth of her children's small hands in hers, their trust in her unwavering. Finally, they reached a nearby barn, a haven untouched by the turmoil. The air inside was thick with hay and the sweet scent of earth. Griffin shut the door behind them, securing it with trembling hands. "Stay low," he instructed, ever calm despite the chaos outside. Clara nodded, her heart still racing. "I'm fine," he replied, wiping sweat from his brow, but she saw the lines of fatigue etched across his face. He had risked everything, stepping into danger to keep them safe. Outside, the echoes of the chaos grew fainter, replaced by an eerie hush. It felt unnatural, a moment frozen in time. Finally, they heard silence, a clear indication the raiders had retreated. Clara felt the weight lift slightly, but not completely. Clara couldn't help but feel the relief blossom within her, but quickly sobered as she looked into his weary eyes. His gaze softened, revealing a core of vulnerability. "I couldn't stand by and watch anyone suffer," he said, his voice barely above a whisper. Tears welled in Clara's eyes, not just for the fear they had faced, but for the connection that had grown between them. The winds of change, once howling against her, now brought a gentle breeze of hope. "I know we've just met," she began, her voice filled with emotion, "but you've become so much more than a protector. You're..." In that moment, the weight of his past began to lift, and for the first time in years, Griffin felt something akin to warmth ripple through his heart. He stepped closer to her, the distance collapsing beneath the weight of their shared experiences. But before they could bridge the gap of uncertainty, the door creaked. A pair of eyes peeked in Eli, brave yet shaken, searching for reassurance. He asked softly, glancing at Griffin. Clara smiled, rushing to him as he revealed his trembling form. He had heard more than she wished he had, absorbing the darkness like a sponge. "We're safe now, sweetheart," she assured him, enveloping her arms around him. Griffin watched the scene unfold, admiration swelling within him. They were a family, forged in the fires of adversity, connected by love, loss, and newfound strength. As morning broke, the sun rose over Silver Creek once more, casting light across the battered homes. Clara felt her pulse steady. The storm had passed, leaving a battered town but a stronger family. Griffin stood at the edge of the barn, silently contemplating the endless horizon. He had set out to protect, but in those days he had found something much greater. He had found a home. Clara approached, standing beside him, and in that moment of shared understanding, they both recognized the journey was far from over. "Thank you," she said, her voice barely a whisper. "No, Clara," he replied, gazing at her with a newfound intensity. And together they stepped into the light, leaving behind the shadows of the past and embracing the uncharted territory of their future. In a rugged world, two hearts entwined, ready to fight for a tomorrow filled with laughter, hope, and love. The howling wind carried a sense of dread as Clara sat on the porch, cradling her trembling hands. The sun dipped below the jagged mountains, casting long shadows that seemed to stretch their fingers towards her, warning her of the darkness closing in. It had been 2 years since her husband had been taken, leaving behind nothing but memories and a house full of silence. With every passing day, the world outside felt more dangerous, like a predator waiting to pounce. Clara's children, small and innocent, were the center of her universe. Eli, her curious 7-year-old, and his spirited sister, Mary, who was just 5, were the last remnants of joy in her life. They played under the creaking swing hanging from an old oak tree, their giggles filling the air momentarily before that laughter faded into the ever-present worries lurking at the edges of her mind. Then it happened. A shout echoed through the streets, followed by the unmistakable cracks of gunfire. Clara's heart raced, her pulse thrumming like a wild drum in her ears. She grabbed her children, pulling them close, instinct taking over. The town had been whispering about raiders, bandits who roamed these parts, seeking to claim whatever they could take in the dead of night. Eli cried, eyes wide with terror. Clara forced a smile, though she felt the weight of fear pressing heavy against her heart. "It's okay, sweethearts." But deep inside, she was anything but okay. Her husband had been the protector, the gentle force that kept the darkness at bay, and now he was gone, leaving her vulnerable and alone. As night fell, Clara's resolve hardened. She couldn't let her children grow up in fear, nor could she allow threats to take root in their lives. She knew she had to do something drastic. The next day, she ventured into the local saloon, a place shrouded in smoke and rough laughter, where time seemed to hold its breath. Men in dusty hats gathered around tables, their voices a low rumble. Clara stepped through the swinging doors and the conversation ceased, eyes turning to her like moths to a flame. "Excuse me," she began, her voice unwavering despite the knot in her stomach. Laughter erupted, slicing through the tension. One man scoffed, leaning back in his chair. Another chimed in, eyes glinting with mockery, but Clara lifted her chin, undeterred. "Good luck with that," the bartender chuckled, wiping his hands on a stained rag. Just then, silence fell as a figure stepped from the shadows. Griffin. He wasn't young. His face was lined with the history of battles for which he'd paid a hefty price. A rugged gunslinger, his reputation rode in with the dust, tales of his unmatched skill whispering through the saloon walls. He looked at Clara, sizing her up, then flicked his gaze toward the raucous men. "Leave her be," he said, his voice like gravel grinding on stone. He turned back to Clara, assessing her with eyes that seemed to pierce straight through to her soul. "I need protection for my children," she said, her voice steady yet vulnerable. He nodded slowly, as if mulling it over. "You don't know what you're asking for." Clara's heart ached. "But I can't lose them." Griffin regarded her for a moment longer, then relented. "Fine." The deal was struck. Even as Clara felt a wave of relief, doubt flickered in the corners of her mind. She had invited this storm into her home. What would it mean for her children? Days turned into weeks, and Griffin became a constant in their lives, an unsettling presence that gradually morphed into a protector. Though his demeanor was rough, he softened around her children. He taught Eli how to hold a gun, but more importantly, he taught him the way of the world, how to face it without flinching. "Be brave, Eli," he'd say, running a hand through the boy's hair. Mary looked up at him with wide eyes, absorbing every word. Clara watched as Griffin's tough exterior cracked just a little, revealing glimpses of warmth that turned into a bond she hadn't expected. The children came to regard him with a mixture of awe and trust, and for the first time in months, Clara found herself feeling a flutter of hope. But as night fell, the shadows that cloaked Silver Creek deepened. Rumors spread of a gathering storm. The raiders were inching closer, their dark cloud looming over the town like a predator circling its prey. One evening, under a sky heavy with foreboding, Griffin stood on the porch, staring into the horizon. Clara approached him, her heart filled with a tension that seemed to vibrate in the air. She asked, the weight of her word hanging between them. "I always worry," he replied, voice low. The night air crackled with a mix of unease and unspoken words. Clara felt the heat radiating between them, and in that moment she realized how deeply she had come to trust this man. Then it came, the chaos they had dreaded. The guttural shout of men echoed through the night, mingled with the cacophony of gunfire that shattered the stillness. Clara's heart raced as she gathered her children close, her protective instincts kicking in. Griffin barked, moving like a shadow as he prepared for the fight ahead. She pleaded, fear tearing through her. "Trust me, I'll get you to safety," he said, a promise glazed with fierce determination. With that, he stepped outside, the door creaking shut behind him. Clara's heart waged war between fear and hope. Each blast of gunfire echoed against her chest like a drum. She clutched Eli and Mary to her, whispering words of comfort through trembling lips. "Mommy, I'm scared," Eli whispered, his eyes glistening with tears. "It's going to be okay. I promise," Clara soothed, unable to promise much more than that. Minutes stretched into what felt like an eternity until the gunfire waned, replaced by an eerie silence. Every heartbeat thundered in her ears as the minutes blurred into one another. Then came the sound of hurried footsteps. Griffin burst through the door, splattered with dirt and fragments of chaos. "Come on," he urged, urgency coloring his tone. Clara cried, her heart aching at the thought of fleeing. "Trust me," he said, his voice low but fierce. They raced through the winding paths of Silver Creek, Clara holding her children tight against her chest, keeping them safe under the blanket of night. Griffin moved like a sturdy shield before them, his stature granting her a flicker of confidence. Each step felt like a heartbeat closer to safety. Finally, they reached a small barn on the outskirts of town, untouched by the violence they had just fled. Griffin swung the door shut behind them, locking out the horrors of the outside world. Clara collapsed against the wooden walls, panting as she pulled her children close. Mary asked, her small voice tremulous. "For now, we are," Clara answered, though her heart was heavy with uncertainty. Griffin dropped his head and exhaled slowly, wiping the sweat from his brow. The tension in his shoulders eased as he turned to face them. Clara saw steel resolve still glimmering in his eyes, but also something softer lying beneath the weight of responsibility and perhaps something else that had grown between them. "Thank you for saving us," Clara whispered, her gratitude spilling over. "I didn't," he started, then paused, his gaze flickering between the children and Clara. "I'd do it again." The bond they had forged in the fire of danger began to glow brighter, surviving amidst the chaos. Clara felt that connection deepen, wrapped around them like a protective blanket, weaving their lives together in a precarious dance. But amidst the flickering candlelight, Clara remembered why she had brought him into her life. She took a deep breath, glancing at the two comforting figures by her side. "Griffin, they need to be safe." Griffin stepped closer, his gaze steady as he considered her words. "You don't have to protect me." "Not just me," she said quietly. Silence wrapped around them like a warm embrace, and for a moment it felt as though the world outside paused to listen. In those moments, hearts bared their truths. Both had suffered losses, both had faced demons of their own choosing, and now they found strength in one another. Hours passed before dawn broke, bringing a pale light that crept through the barn's cracks. Clara laid her head against the wooden beams, exhaustion weighing heavily upon her eyes. But as the sun illuminated the space, she felt renewed resolve fill her heart. Griffin was still there, holding vigil. Clara found the courage to speak the truth that had begun to blossom within her. "I don't want this life for my children," she confessed. His expression softened. "I want them to know love, safety, family," she said, her heart racing at the thought. "Then we fight for that future together," Griffin replied, the weight of his promise wrapping around her like an unbreakable bond. The next day they worked together, hand in hand. Clara and Griffin planned, strategized, and became partners not only in survival but in life. They set to arm themselves, knowledge first, weapons second. They trained Eli, instilling courage, and taught Mary the strength that lay within her. As the weeks unfolded, so did a life together that felt richer, fuller. Griffin became a fixture in their home, an unwavering protector and a father figure guiding her children through the treacherous landscape of their world. Clara saw hope blossom anew as laughter echoed through their days, light piercing the shadows that once threatened to consume them. But with this new life came challenges too. The raiders still lurked, waiting for another opportunity to strike, and as storm clouds gathered over Silver Creek, Clara and Griffin prepared for the inevitable confrontation. One evening, the shadows deepened, and a sense of foreboding filled the air. Griffin gathered Clara and the children, their faces serious, but Clara felt an overwhelming sense of unity, a family forged in the fires of strife. "We'll face this," he said to her, his voice unwavering. And so they did. As chaos erupted once more, Clara felt fear but also had a fierce determination burning in her heart. They were not alone, they had each other. With each challenge they faced, Clara not only fortified her children but became fortified herself. Henry's ghost lingered in her past, haunting her often. But each time she saw Griffin's steadfast strength, she felt less weighed down by that grief and more uplifted by love that was growing before her eyes. Then came the clash of fight that would shape lives forever. The raiders descended upon Silver Creek, reckless and brutal. But Clara, Griffin, and the children stood together, resolute and fierce. As the battle raged around them, Clara's heart surged with fierce love and protectiveness. She and Griffin fought side by side, bolstering the community, rallying those who had once cowered in fear. With every shot fired and every cry of defiance, Clara began to understand not just the depth of her courage but the power of hope that radiated from their unity. In the end, they stood victorious, but the cost weighed heavily upon them. Clara looked at Griffin, breathless and alive, and she found him waiting for her gaze, an unspoken bond tightening between them. "I never expected this," she admitted, both afraid and exhilarated. In that moment, surrounded by the remnants of their struggle and the light beginning to break through, they realized they had forged something incredibly strong, a family that bore scars yet stood unbreakable. As the dawn broke over Silver Creek once more, Clara took a deep breath, not of fear but of hope. No longer a widow adrift in sorrow, she had become a warrior, a mother, and perhaps something more, a partner standing alongside a man who understood her struggle and shared her dreams. Together, they faced the sunrise, ready to embrace the uncharted journey ahead. In a world fraught with uncertainty, they were tethered in love, hearts intertwined in a story that was just beginning. A gunshot rang out, startling Clara from her reverie. She stumbled, dropping the basket of laundry she had been folding. The fabric fell to the dusty floor like a shroud, silently signaling the threat creeping closer with every hushed whisper. Eli and Mary, her young children, played in the yard, their laughter hanging in the air like fragile glass ready to shatter. Clara's heart skipped a beat. That sound, it wasn't from a playful gunfight described in books. It was a reminder that danger was no longer a distant tale. It was here, now, threatening to upend everything she held dear. The sun dipped low, casting elongated shadows across the porch, each one a specter of her fears, nudging her to action. For 2 years, she had held tight to her husband's memory, a kind man who protected them until he could no longer defend them. Now, in his absence, the world felt as jagged as the mountains rising above the valley. The townsfolk had been murmuring about raiders for weeks. Clara had brushed it aside, believing that if she whispered her fears into the wind, they might stay away. But the echoes of gunfire told her differently. There was no more time for denial. She gathered her courage and thought of her children. Clara rose to her feet and marched to the saloon, the heart of their small town, where tough men gathered to nurse whiskey and swap stories. As she stepped through the heavy doors, the dim light revealed faces that turned her way, suspicion and curiosity dancing in their gazes. Asked an old man behind the bar, his voice gruff as gravel. "I'm looking for a gunslinger," Clara declared boldly, her voice steady despite the rush of anxiety that clawed at her insides. Laughter erupted. One man jeered. "I'm serious," she shot back, stepping further inside. Another wave of laughter swept through the crowd, but Clara stood firm, fury flaring within her. She had come for help, not ridicule. Then, out of the corner of her eye, she spotted him, a figure half hidden in shadows. Griffin. The townsfolk spoke of him in hushed tones, a man with a reputation forged through blood and sweat. They said he was a weapon, a tool created for vengeance and strength. He glanced her way, brow raised, a flicker of interest sparking in his deep-set eyes. He asked, his voice low and rough like the earth itself. "Yes," she breathed, taking a step toward him. He challenged, folding his arms across his chest, a mountain of muscle cloaked in the dust of the trails. "Because I can pay," Clara replied. He studied her, weighing her words against the knowledge of her vulnerability. The air between them was thick with possibilities, danger, strength, and unnamable fear. Finally, he shrugged. "Fine." Clara felt a weight lift slightly from her heart. She met his gravelly gaze, determination stirring inside her. Days turned into weeks. Griffin settled into their lives like a shadow, moving through their home with a quiet intensity. He became a constant presence, gruff yet protective, a father figure teaching Eli how to handle a gun, instilling in him a sense of strength that she feared might grow too soon. "Your boy needs to know how to protect himself," he replied without hesitation. She understood, but she also wanted to shield them from the harsh truths of life for as long as she could. Yet there was something undeniably comforting about having him there. She'd watch him sit with her children, laughter breaking through the tension that had previously choked their home. He told stories of faraway places, of fights fought and won, of the lawlessness that made a gunslinger's life both thrilling and bitter. In those moments, Clara could not reject the warmth building between them, a bond forged through shared trials. But that bond also brought an undercurrent of chaos. Griffin carried his past like a storm cloud, his silence a reminder that he'd seen more than any man should. One night, while the children slept, Clara found him on the porch, staring into the distance, eyes lost in memories. "Griffin," she said softly, approaching quietly. He looked at her, revealing a glimpse of the man beneath the hardened surface. "Lost too many people in my life." Clara felt a pang of understanding, a mirror held up to her own fears. "You don't have to carry that alone," she said, hoping to bridge the distance between them. He turned away, grappling with the vulnerability she had laid at his feet. "It's easier to be alone," he muttered. But Clara could see the longing for connection, just as she felt it prickling in her own chest. Then one night, everything changed. The sky was a vivid tapestry of blues when a group of men, shadows against the horizon, charged into town. Clara's heart sank, dread curling around her throat as panic painted their faces. She screamed, the word escaping her lips with desperation. Griffin's eyes narrowed as he stepped into action, ready to defend their lives. The chaotic cacophony of shouting and gunfire mingled with the night's eerie stillness. Clara grabbed her children and pressed them to her side as the world erupted around them. "Stay inside." Griffin boomed over the noise, his voice a beacon through the storm. Eli whimpered, gripped with terror. Clara urged, both protectiveness and fear churning inside her. Griffin sprinted to the door, his determined stance a shield against the incoming violence. The door burst open, and chaos spilled into their home like a flood. Clara's heart raced as she felt the ground beneath her tremble with each footstep lurching toward her. More gunshots echoed, the sound sharp and vicious. Clara held her children tight, whispering the same words of safety she hoped would shield them from the horror spilling into their sanctuary. Time blurred as fear turned the world into a fevered dream. Yet through the chaos, Clara couldn't tear her eyes from Griffin. He moved as if he was born for this. Each shot fired, every curse shouted, he stood firm, a warrior embodying the strength she wished she could find. Suddenly, the commotion stilled. Clara's pulse raced as she peered out the window to see Griffin standing over a fallen man. Her heart sank as the sight splashed over her like cold water. He yelled, urgency igniting the night. Clara could feel the weight of the moment crashing against her heart. He didn't look at her, but his voice was a roar that demanded obedience. Her voice cracked, dread piercing through her. His words slapped her like a firm reminder of what truly mattered. With one last look at the man who had shielded them, Clara inhaled sharply, gathering her children in her arms. She pushed them forward, urging them through the door. "We have to go." Outside, the air filled with tension as they ran, every footstep echoing a desperate balance between fear and hope. Mary whimpered, clinging tightly to her brother. "Anywhere but here," Clara replied, her heart pounding against the backdrop of gunfire and chaos, fear pushing her feet faster. Griffin held the line. She could see his outline behind her, standing strong, fighting to keep the monsters at bay. She felt tears sting her eyes, the weight of uncertainty resting heavily on her shoulders. Eli asked, voice shaking. Her heart twisted at the thought. "No, sweetheart." Moments dragged on, the terrifying sound of the fight echoing in the distance. All Clara could do was run, hoping against hope that they would find safety. Just as panic began to overwhelm her, they stumbled upon an old barn, a forgotten refuge amid chaos. Clara ushered her children inside, sheltering them behind hay bales, heart racing as she listened for the sounds of the fight creeping toward them. "Stay quiet," she urged, pressing a finger to her lips. With every passing second, the air thickened with uncertainty. Time crept by like a haunting melody, each heartbeat demanding an answer. Finally, the sound of footsteps broke the darkness, breaking Clara's resolve. She whispered, crouching low and praying that safety would be theirs just a little longer. Then the door creaked open. With a flood of relief, Clara felt her heart leap as Griffin stepped inside, battered but unbroken. He panted, breathless eyes locking onto hers. She asked, rushing to his side, her heart alight with relief and worry. "No, "Just tired," he said, glancing at Eli and Mary, a fleeting smile tugging at his lips. Clara felt a surge of gratitude wash over her. In that barn, amidst the echoes of chaos, they had built a shelter of their own, a sanctuary fortified by courage and an unwavering bond. They stayed low, clinging to one another, sharing whispered stories, illuminating their worries with laughter even amid tears. Clara felt warmth through the shadows, the realization dawning on her that they weren't just surviving, they were becoming something new together. As day broke, a slight chill filled the air, laced with the weight of the previous night's events. Clara stepped outside cautiously, Griffin close behind. One by one, they emerged into a world changed. Their town lay quiet, scars visible in the aftermath. Yet from the wreckage, Clara felt something fragile but undeniable. The love they had forged, strengthened amidst adversity, shone brighter than she'd ever imagined. "I've never faced anything like that," she murmured, her heart full of conflicting emotions. "Neither have I," Griffin replied, his voice a low rumble. Clara felt warmth pool in her chest, gratitude and longing merging. The man who had entered her life as a gunslinger had become a partner and protector, and perhaps, in time, something deeper. In that defining moment, under the golden light of dawn, Clara took a step towards the future, a future she shared with her children and the man who had risked everything to protect them. Together, they would rebuild their lives, embracing the strength that comes from facing the storms together. And as they stood hand in hand, ready to carve out their new tomorrow, Clara took a deep breath, not of fear, but of hope, resolute in the knowledge that they were not just survivors, they were a family. The wind howled through the desolate streets of Dry Gulch, carrying with it a sense of impending doom. Clara stood on the porch of her little house, her fingers gripping the wooden railing as she stared out into the gathering storm. With each gust, her heart beat faster. Life had been too quiet since the day her husband had been taken from her. 2 years had slipped away, and without him, the shadows in their small home felt darker. With the sun beginning to set, the sky turned a fierce shade of red, casting long, ominous shadows across the ground. Clara's 2 young children, Eli and Mary, played in the yard, their laughter mingling with the haunting sound of the wind. For a moment, Clara allowed herself to smile at the innocence of their joy, but that smile quickly faded under the weight of dark thoughts. In the town, whispers had been spreading like wildfire. Gangs of raiders were moving closer, taking what they wanted from families who had little left to give. Clara could no longer dismiss the danger lurking just beyond Dry Gulch. The laughter of her children suddenly felt fragile, like glass teetering on the edge of a cliff. A memory tugged at her heart, a time when her husband would have chased away the fear with his strong arms. With every passing day, panic clawed at her throat. She thought of the threats, the men who would take advantage of a grieving widow, and she knew she couldn't wait any longer. She needed help. Clara marched into town, determination driving her forward. The saloon was the last place she wanted to go, but desperation pushed her inside. Wooden tables filled with rough men greeted her like wolves eyeing a lone rabbit. Murmurs dropped to whispers as she stepped through the door. "I'm looking for a gunslinger," she spoke, her voice steady despite the daggers of judgment aimed her way. Laughter erupted, the sound harsh and mocking. One man called out, his face twisted into a sneer. "I need someone to protect my children," Clara replied, a fire igniting within her. The laughter died, replaced by silence that hung thick in the air. Yet from the shadows, a man emerged, stepping forward with the weight of untold stories in his eyes. Griffin. He was known to many as the best gunslinger in the region, feared for his skills and haunted by a past that hadn't let him go. He was a man whose very presence commanded attention. He asked, voice like a distant rumble of thunder. "Yes," Clara replied, meeting his gaze head-on. He studied her for a moment before a hint of skepticism crossed his face. "Because I'm asking," she said, her voice unwavering. "I can pay. I have a little money left." Griffin raised an eyebrow, curiosity sparking beneath the surface of his hardened exterior. "It's what I have, but I'm not just paying you to watch over them." He paused, weighing her words, and Clara felt as though she was standing on the precipice of something monumental. Finally, he nodded. "All right, I'll take the job." Relief flooded Clara as hope began to gleam in her heart. As night fell, she took Griffin to her home, where Eli and Mary were still playing, oblivious to the darker world outside. She introduced him, her voice strong despite the fear gnawing at her insides. "Children, this is Griffin." Both kids looked up, faces painted with curiosity. Eli clutched his toy gun while Mary, shy and timid, smiled hesitantly. Griffin knelt down to their level, a softening happening as he interacted with them. "Hey there, little ones. I promise to keep you both safe." Griffin didn't just become a guardian, he became a presence, a figure of strength in their home. As the days turned into weeks, he instructed Eli on how to hold a gun properly, showing him not only how to aim, but also the responsibility that came with it. Clara watched, heart heavy yet filled with gratitude at how he was helping her children grasp the harsh realities of life while still giving them the tools to protect themselves. Yet at nightfall, shadows still danced in the corners of her mind. She would find Griffin sitting on the porch long after the children had gone to bed, staring into the abyss of the night. It troubled her, that silence of his. There were scars behind those cold blue eyes, each one telling a story of loss that mirrored her own. One evening she stepped outside, the moonlight cradling them both. He turned his gaze toward her, the hardness in his features softening just a fraction. "I've lost people." "Me too," Clara whispered, the words heavy with understanding. Despite the pain, Clara found strength in their shared sorrow. As darkness enveloped them, a bond began to emerge, something deeper growing in the quiet moments they shared. But the calm before the storm is often just a fleeting illusion. The town buzzed with unease, talk of raiders growing louder, their presence looming like a cloud ready to burst. Clara felt the tension coil tighter in her chest. One fateful night, while the children slept, gunfire erupted in the distance, a harsh reminder of the chaos that lay beyond the safety of their walls. Clara's heart raced, panic rising like bile in her throat. She ran to the children's room, finding them wide awake, fear etched across their small faces. Mary cried, small arms reaching for her. Clara urged, her protective instincts kicking into overdrive. Eli's hand gripped hers tightly as they huddled in the corner of the room. He asked, eyes wide with terror. "The men are fighting," she whispered, wishing with every fiber of her being that this fear could be banished to the shadows forever. Just then, the door slammed open and Griffin rushed in, his eyes sharp and alive. "We need to go," Clara stammered, every ounce of her being fighting against the chaos. "The raiders are close." The urgency in his voice broke through her fears, every word echoing a sense of truth. She demanded, clutching her children tighter. "Out the back. Follow me," he said, urgency fueling his commands. As they burst onto the darkened porch, Clara's heart pounded violently against her chest. Griffin ushered them forward, his strides long and determined. With each step, the shouts and gunfire grew more distinct, filling Clara's heart with dread. Fear spurred her legs into action, propelling her away from the danger they left behind. But it also anchored her to the profound uncertainty of what they might face next. They sprinted toward the stables, the scent of hay and horse sweat filling the air. Griffin urged Clara to help him saddle a horse he'd picked out, his deft movements showcasing years of experience as he prepared for an escape. "Get the kids on," he said tersely, eyes darting around as if he could see the shadows gathering. Clara swung up onto the horse, and with one swift motion, she pulled Eli onto her lap, while Mary clung to her side. Griffin mounted another horse, glancing back at them, his expression a mix of fierce determination and unyielding resolve. He commanded. Then, as if the world itself had unleashed chaos, they bolted into the night, the sound of hooves pounding against the earth like a heartbeat set to explode. Clara's chest tightened as the noise from the town faded behind them. Eli shouted over the wind. Griffin replied, the urgency in his voice melding with the adrenaline pulsing through Clara's veins. They galloped toward the hills, seeking refuge away from the chaos, and through it all, Clara felt the warmth of her children nestled close. Panic surged and faded like waves, but her mind remained steadfast in her determination to protect them. As they reached the top of a hill, Griffin slowed his horse, and Clara followed suit. They brought the horses to a stop under a thicket of trees, the foliage providing a brief sense of concealment. Clara panted, heart racing as she scanned the area. For now, Griffin replied, but his expression remained vigilant. Night folded around them, a darkness embracing the trio as they huddled together. Clara could feel the weight of fear in the air, but also a flicker of hope, a fragile light driving away the shadows. As the minutes turned into hours, the sounds of distant chaos began to die down. Clara felt exhaustion seeping into her bones, but she fought it. Her children curled up next to her, their small bodies drawing strength from her calm. Finally, exhausted and worried, Clara turned to Griffin. "Thank you," she whispered, the sincerity of her words pouring from her heart. "Don't mention it," he replied, but she saw the relief cross his features. He was a protector, but also a man carrying his own burdens, a mirror reflecting her struggles, fears, and vulnerabilities. Days blurred into a haze of uncertainty as they moved from one hiding spot to another. Griffin didn't leave their side, guiding them through tangled woods and forgotten trails. Each step forward felt like survival, but little by little, Clara's fear began to give way to strength balanced with hope. "I'm scared of what comes next," she confessed one evening as they sat under the stars, the fire flickering beside them. "You faced the worst," Griffin replied, his tone steady. "It feels heavy," she admitted, the weight of her vulnerability crashing down again. "That weight carries you, reminds you of who you are," he said, voice soothing. "You are not alone, Clara." With those words, something shifted. In the darkness, she found a glimmer of trust starting to bloom. The walls she had built around her heart began to crack, allowing room for the warmth of companionship to seep in. Days turned into weeks of hiding, running, each moment testing their resolve. Clara felt the storm of her memories recede as she learned to rely on Griffin's instincts, his innate ability to navigate danger guiding them home. Then one crisp morning, a message came. The raiders were in pursuit, threatening the very existence of those who were still standing in their path. Clara felt the weight of that news settle in her gut, dark and unyielding. "We need to confront this," she said to Griffin, her voice breaking the tension in the morning air. He looked at her, surprise skimming across his features. He studied her, his hardened exterior crumbling, revealing respect. That strength bloomed within her as they drew a plan to rally others' families still holding on to hope. Clara felt a sense of purpose, not just as a mother but as a leader guiding those who would stand against the encroaching darkness. As they started to gather allies, Clara found herself transforming. She spoke with confidence, passion igniting a fire in those who listened. The townsfolk began to band together, united in their determination to protect what had once been taken from them. Amidst all of this, Clara found even more strength in Griffin. He stood by her side, a reassuring presence as they faced the future together. Night after night, she found herself sharing stories, not only of sorrow but of dreams, hopes rekindled as the sun rose higher on the horizon. And in those shared moments as they trained the townsfolk, Clara began to see Griffin not just as a gunslinger, but as a man with whom she could face the world. The walls around her heart gave way to something more profound, a connection that grew deeper with each day. Finally, the day of reckoning approached, and as the raiders stormed into town, Clara stood at the forefront, heart racing but resolve steady. She felt a surge of adrenaline as the weight of a community rested on her shoulders. The people she'd come to care for, the children she wished to protect, were all watching her. Griffin was by her side, ready to fight as the first shouts erupted from the enemy. They rushed forward, prepared for chaos. Clara shouted to her neighbors, determination etched into every word. With each shot fired, the people of Dry Gulch stood firm, the sound of gunfire mixing with the cries of defiance roaring through the air. Clara found her strength not just in her body, but in the collective spirit of those around her. Griffin fought like a whirlwind, his agility and precision astonishing. He was a force of nature. Clara held her ground, directing others, making sure mothers and children were safe while holding on to the determination that had driven her this far. And as the battle raged on, something shifted within her. Fear transformed into fierce protection, turning into something she hadn't felt in a long time. Hope surged like fire, igniting courage even amidst the chaos. When the dust settled, the raiders were forced back, their attempts thwarted. Clara stood there, breathing hard, sweat dripping down her face, witnessing victory rise like the sun climbing over the horizon. Through the haze of battle, she caught sight of Griffin, his face etched with exhaustion but also relief. Their eyes met, and something unspoken flickered between them, a connection that transcended battle lines and scars. They had fought together, survived together, and in that act of defiance, Clara realized that what she sought wasn't just protection, but a bond that fortifies love in the face of adversity. As the townsfolk began to gather, celebrating their newfound freedom, she felt a weight break away, healed by the strength they had discovered in one another. In the aftermath, the air felt lighter, filled with hope and resilience. Clara knew one thing. Their lives would never be the same, but they had reclaimed their home, faced the darkness together, and emerged brighter on the other side. Hand in hand with Griffin, she stepped forward into the new dawn, no longer just a widow but a warrior, a mother, and a pioneer ready to rewrite their story. A story built on trust, love, and fierce determination. And as they walked into the rising sun, Clara felt her heart swell. They would face whatever came next together, their pasts united and their futures intertwined, grounded in the strength they had discovered within each other. Together, they were a family. The sound of distant gunfire echoed through the quiet town of Red Meadow, a rattling reminder of the lawlessness creeping just beyond its borders. Clara, standing at the entrance of her small wooden home, felt her heart race. The sun hung low in the sky, casting long shadows as her children, Eli and Mary, played in the yard, blissfully unaware of the danger approaching. A heavy dread settled over her, amplifying the familiar ache of loss that had lingered since her husband passed. 2 years had slipped away, each day more challenging than the last. Clara had spent countless hours trying to maintain normalcy for her children, to wrap them in the safety of their home. But how could one woman protect them against threats that loomed like dark clouds outside their window? The fear clawed at her chest with icy fingers. Then came a single moment, a sharp, piercing scream that shattered the evening air. Clara froze as cold reality washed over her. It wasn't just thunder this time, it was a warning. She knew what she had to do. She had heard murmurs from the townsfolk about raiders prowling nearby, ruthless men who took whatever they wanted, including lives. It was time to act. With her heart pounding, she hurried inside, her children's laughter echoing around the house. She kissed their foreheads, brushing a hand through their hair, and with a shaky breath, Clara stepped out into the fading light. Had to find help, and she knew that help came in the form of men like the Gunslinger rumored to be in town. The saloon was a dark place, pulsing with life, laughter, and the scent of whiskey. As she entered, the chatter grew quiet. Rough-looking men dressed in dusty attire turned to study her like a hawk assessing its prey. Clara felt a jolt of fear but pushed through, shaking it off like dust from her boots. "I'm looking for a gunslinger," Clara called out, her voice steady despite the knot in her stomach. Laughter erupted, sharp and cutting. "You need a gunslinger, girl," a man sneered, raising his glass. The others joined in, hooting and hollering like they were at a wild rodeo. But Clara stood firm, her chin lifted defiantly. "Good luck finding a man willing to risk it for a couple of kids," another jeered. The mocking laughter grew louder, but she didn't waver. Not this time. As the crowd basked in their callousness, the saloon doors swung open, and a figure stepped into the room, silencing the raucous noise with sheer presence. Griffin. His reputation preceded him, much like a shadow cloaked in silence. He carried the weight of 1,000 battles etched into the lines of his weathered face. The other men fell quiet, their amusement fading in the wake of his stare. He moved through the room with a certain grace that belied his rugged appearance. He said, scrutinizing her with piercing blue eyes that seemed to see through to her very soul. "I'm here for my children," Clara replied, unwavering. Griffin regarded her for a heartbeat longer before giving a curt nod. Clara took a shaky breath, desperation threading through her words. "I can pay. I have a little money saved." His gaze softened, though only slightly. "I'll do whatever it takes to protect them," she said, the conviction in her voice cutting through the tension that hung heavily between them. After a moment that felt like an eternity, Griffin relented. "All right, I'll take the job." Hope flickered in Clara's chest as she stumbled her way back home. She had taken a step into the unknown, opening her life to a man whose past could rival her own in sorrow, but for her children it was worth it. Over the next few days, Griffin became a fixture in their home, a silent guardian watching over them like a shadow. Clara felt a mix of gratitude and anxiety. He wasn't just a gunslinger. He was a man marked by pain, his very presence a constant reminder of her own vulnerabilities. Every evening, after the last light of day faded, Clara would find him outside, staring into the horizon as if wrestling with ghosts only he could see. She felt the urge to reach out, words of comfort perched on the tip of her tongue, but the weight of unspoken history hung in the air. One evening, while the children played inside, Clara summoned her courage and approached him. She asked quietly, breaking the suffocating silence. Griffin shifted his gaze toward her, vulnerability flickering in his eyes. "I lost people I cared about." "Me too," she whispered, feeling a bond of shared grief form like a thread between them. Days turned into weeks, and with each passing moment, Clara found herself entrusting Griffin with more than just her family's safety. He taught Eli how to shoot, instilling in him the responsibility that came with wielding a gun. Clara watched, heart pounding, torn between pride and fear. Yet despite the darkness outside, laughter began to seep back into their home, a testament to resilience. Griffin eased his way into their family's fabric, sharing stories that made Eli and Mary's eyes light up with wonder. One night, as they sat around a crackling fire, he told tales of distant places, adventures brought to life through the warmth of his words. In those moments, Clara caught glimpses of the man beneath the hardened surface, a man capable of caring deeply. And with each story, her heart slowly opened, inviting him in. But calm didn't come without a price. One fateful afternoon, as the sun hung high and stubborn in the sky, Clara heard the distressing news that the raiders had been spotted nearby. Panic gripped her heart afresh as she rushed home, her thoughts swirling like leaves in a storm. Griffin would know what to do. As she threw open the door, chaos erupted. Mary and Eli clutched each other with wide eyes, fear saturating the air. They cried in unison, their childhood innocence hanging by a fragile thread. "Listen to me, kiddos," Clara said, squaring her shoulders. "We have to be brave." Just then, the front door slammed open. Griffin stood there, a visage of composure amidst the storm, urgency swirling in his eyes. "We have to leave now," Clara shouted, her heart racing. He ordered. With shaking hands, Clara ushered her children toward the exit. The sound of approaching horses grew louder, blaring like a horn of doom, and adrenaline coursed through her veins. They rushed out the back door into the alley, the diminishing light casting long shadows that chased them like a predator hungry for its prey. They sprinted, heartbeats synchronizing as they raced toward the outskirts of town. Griffin led the way, his instincts sharp and driven. Clara glanced back. The sound of chaos eclipsed the steady rhythm of their flight. Griffin shouted, glancing back at her, his gaze steady but fierce. As Clara darted through the trees lining the path, the pounding of hooves echoed behind them, a reminder of the danger on their heels. She urged, gripping her children's hands tightly. They reached a secluded grove, the trees thickening like a protective barrier against the impending threat. Clara collapsed to her knees, her breath escaping her as she pulled her children close. "We'll be safe here for a bit," she reassured them, though uncertainty clung to her words. As night fell, Clara's heart raced, listening intently for every sound. Her mind was a storm of fear and hope, intertwining in an agonizing dance. At that moment, she longed for the comfort of her home, the embrace of her husband, and the security of a life free from danger. Griffin knelt beside her, his expression readable only by the flickering moonlight. "We'll figure this out," he murmured, his voice low, steady, and filled with resolve. She replied, doubt creeping into her voice. "They won't," Griffin said fiercely, confidence wrapped around him like armor. And as morning broke, Clara felt both fear and hope intertwining, two conflicting forces warring within her. Together, they started the long road to reclaiming their lives. And as Bryce led them along hidden trails, Clara gained strength not just in their journey, but in each shared moment. Eventually, they arrived at a small, abandoned cabin deep in the woods where they would make their stand. The air felt heavy, charged with possibilities unspoken. Griffin positioned himself by the door, keeping watch over them. In the days that followed, Clara began to breathe again, her children safe under Griffin's protective gaze. They trained in their rustic retreat, forming strategies and building defenses, an impromptu family of sorts, bound together by love and determination. Each evening, as the fire warmed the cabin, Clara felt safety seep into her bones. She could watch her children grow, laughter roiling through the cabin like sweet music. Griffin's presence became part of her daily rhythm, shadows dancing farther away, replaced by trust and camaraderie. He paused, a flicker of pain glazing his eyes before he responded. "I lost my family." The weight of his loss settled in the small space between them, a shared understanding thickening the air. "I can't imagine," she said gently. "Most don't," he replied, his voice barely a whisper. The admission hung between them, fragile yet unbreakable. For the first time, Clara saw his heart, the burdens he carried mirrored in her own. Hope blossomed unexpected, fierce and blooming like a flower through cracked pavement. As days turned into weeks, urgency morphed into preparation. Clara pushed herself and her children, keeping their spirits high along with Griffin's patience, training them fervently, determined to face the storm together. Then one sunny afternoon, news arrived from a local trader they had befriended. Raiders were drawing near, planning another attack on their town. Fear exploded. Clara felt it choke her breath. She asked Griffin, heart racing as the reality set in. "We fight," he said without hesitation, the conviction ringing in his voice. He gathered the locals who had hidden in the shadows, warriors ready to reclaim their town. Clara could see the change in their eyes, the determination rising like the dawn after a long night. As the townsfolk rallied and prepared defenses, Clara stood beside Griffin, her heart igniting. "We can protect them together," she said. Griffin met her gaze, warmth shining through his blue eyes. That battle sprung forth like a predator, wild and chaotic. Clara fought alongside her children, the adrenaline surging as they faced their fears head-on. They protected each other, the spirit of their makeshift family weaving through every shot fired and every heart that beat fiercely with resolve. In the harsh chaos of the fight, they pushed back, brave souls united by hope, by newfound strength. With every enemy they faced, Clara found herself rising along with them, a fierce mother clawing through every barrier to protect that which mattered most. When the dust settled, victory lingered sweetly in the air, a promise that echoed between breaths. Clara stood, panting and tethered to a flush of elation and relief. They had fought together, survived together, and emerged stronger. Griffin approached her, a rare smile tugging at his lips. "You did well," he said, his praise filling her heart. But deep inside, as Clara looked around at her children and the community surrounding them, she realized something far more profound than mere survival. She had found a family, a bond forged in fire, love, and sheer determination. From that day forward, Clara knew she wouldn't just live in fear of raiders. Together with Griffin and their community, they would build a life full of possibilities. They would not just stand, they would thrive. With her heart light, Clara took Griffin's hand, fingers intertwining like roots that ran deep into the earth. They faced the future, ready to embrace what came next, a dance between hope and resilience, love and protection. Together, they had carved out a new story, a testament to survival flowering alongside hope, twined like ivy around the very foundations of their lives. And as they stepped into the dawning light, they knew they would face whatever storm came next as a family, bound by love and strength that could not be broken. The night was fractured by the sharp crack of a gunshot, piercing the still air like a knife. Clara froze, heart pounding, the sound echoing ominously through her little house. She had heard stories of danger swirling around their small town, whispers of raiders and outlaws forming a storm just beyond their fragile safety. The laughter of her children, Eli and Mary, drifted in from the yard, blissfully unaware of the dark cloud gathering above them. But that laughter now felt like a distant memory, teetering on the edge of a precipice. With every heartbeat, fear coiled tighter around her chest. She thought of her husband, the protector of their family, the man who had held them all together like glue. Since his death, the weight of the world had lain on her shoulders, and now, seeing the shadows lengthen outside, she realized she could not hold that weight alone. Gripping the doorframe, Clara forced herself to step outside. the cool night air hitting her face like a cold slap. She looked out into the darkness, heart racing as she scanned the edges of their property. The shadows danced like specters, and the distant sound of horses galloping sent chills racing down her spine. Clara turned back to the house, her instincts screaming that she had to protect her children. Mary called, her voice ringing out sweetly amidst panic. Clara closed her eyes for a moment, drawing strength from that sound. She had to be brave. She had to find someone who could help her before that laughter turned to screams. Without a moment's hesitation, Clara knew where she had to go. The saloon. It was a place where bad men convened, but also where she might find the help she desperately needed. She stepped into the night, comforting her children with reassurances that felt shaky even as they left her lips. Once inside the saloon, the atmosphere hit her like a punch. Men sat at tables, their faces lit by the dim light of oil lamps, laughter mixing with the sound of clinking glasses. Their eyes turned to her, curiosity split with a hint of mocking surprise. Clara swallowed hard as the laughter died, replaced by heavy silence. One burly man barked as he leaned back, arms crossed across his chest. "I need a gunslinger," she declared, trying to mask the tremor in her voice. Laughter erupted again, and Clara felt humiliation wash over her like cold water. Sneered another man, a cruel smile etched across his face. But before she could respond, a silence swept over the room like a heavy blanket. A figure stepped forward, and Clara felt her breath hitch. Griffin. He was a man forged by the trials of a harsh world, a gunslinger with a reputation steeped in violence and sorrow. The men parted for him, and their bravado faded as he moved closer, eyes assessing her with a mixture of interest and caution. He asked, his voice low and gravelly. "I need you to keep my children safe from the raiders," Clara replied, her voice stronger now, emboldened by the urgency of her mission. Griffin raised an eyebrow, clearly skeptical. "I can offer more than just money," Clara said, determination hardening in her voice. "I'll work for you." Griffin stepped closer, the weight of his presence causing the air to thicken. "You don't understand what you're asking for, lady. It's not just a job, it's a risk." "I understand better than you think," Clara said, her heart racing. "I've lost too much already." After a tense moment, Griffin studied her, something shifting in his gaze. "Fine," he said finally, his tone firm. "I'll take the job." Relief rushed through Clara, but it was a guarded relief. She had opened a door into darkness, inviting a stranger into her home with hopes pinned on him. As the weight of her decision settled in, Clara felt a flicker of hope, a fragile light amidst the dread that felt so heavy. Days turned into weeks, and the reality of Griffin's presence began to reshape their lives. He moved into their small home as a silent guardian, keeping a careful watch over Clara's children. Eli and Mary were drawn to him, fascinated by the authority that radiated around him. Clara knew they needed that stability, that sense of security in the midst of chaos. Griffin took Eli under his wing, teaching him how to hold a gun, not just how to shoot, but how to respect the weapon. Clara observed them from a distance, pride and panic battling inside her. Each lesson felt like a small step closer to preparedness, yet she couldn't shake the fear that laid thick over everything, as if she were sailing through a fog she couldn't see past. One evening, while the children played games inside, Griffin stood on the porch, gaze fixed on the horizon. Something in his posture intrigued her. It was as if he were waiting for something to come, a storm building just out of sight. "Griffin," she called to him, stepping onto the porch. "Just the stars," he replied, but the tension in his voice told a different story. She asked, joining him in gazing at the vastness of the night sky. "I've seen too much in this world. You never know when it's coming," he said, his voice laced with a pain that felt familiar. He was so different from the man she had imagined, the one she had hired for protection. She found herself wanting to understand him, to peel back the layers of the mystery that surrounded him. She asked, an invitation for him to share. He turned his gaze to her, the vulnerability in his eyes surprising her. "Lost too many people to count. Friends, family." Clara nodded, feeling that connection they shared, each word weaving a bond between them, an understanding wrapped in shared grief. Amidst their growing camaraderie, Clara began to find moments of sunshine among the shadows. Griffin ceased to be just a hired gun. He became a guardian, a figure of strength for her children. Together, they formed a new family, and for the first time since her husband's death, Clara felt a flicker of happiness seep back into her life. Yet just as life began to feel normal, the storm that had been brewing finally broke. One fateful night, the sound of approaching hooves filled the air, deep, ominous, and unrelenting. Clara's heart raced as the memories of her husband flooded her mind. She ushered her children into the small living room, their laughter fading behind worried expressions. "Stay close to me," she urged, gripping their little hands as they peeked out the window. Eli's voice trembled, fear lacing his words. As the thunder of horses grew closer, Griffin returned, tension etched into every line of his face. "They're here," he said, his voice low and steady, yet urgent. Clara's heart sank as the reality of danger wrapped around her like a vice. "Under the floorboards," he commanded, voice cutting through the chaos. Just then, the door blasted open, men shouting and pushing through like a flood. Clara grabbed her children tight, their small frames trembling against her. She urged, leading them toward the trapdoor in the floor. With one last look at Griffin, Clara squeezed her children's hands and ushered them down, their small bodies disappearing into the dark. She felt the weight of panic crushing her, yet there was no time to hesitate. She lowered herself into the hidden space, trying to quiet their whimpers as the world above erupted in chaos. Gunfire erupted in the house as Clara held her children, fear painting her world black. "It's going to be all right," she whispered, her heart hammering against her ribs. Time stretched, every second felt like a lifetime. Above them, chaos reigned. Clara could hear Griffin's gruff voice barking orders, could feel the air thick with tension. The sound of gunshots echoed, mingling with shouts that sent chills racing down her spine. Eli whispered, terror lining his voice. Clara pressed her finger to her lips, signaling for silence. "Just a bit longer, sweetheart." Minutes dragged on, shadows creeping around her, and all Clara could do was keep her children close. As the terror outside raged on, she felt the weight of her decisions pressing down harder than ever before. Had she done enough? Could she protect her children when it truly mattered? And then mercifully, it ended. She heard shouting retreating into the distance, the sound of boots pounding away from her home. Clara's heart raced, but her hope flickered back to life. Could they be safe? Griffin returned, breathless but unbroken. He asked, scanning their hidden space, finding her eyes. Relief washed over her as he knelt beside them. She asked breathlessly, her heart pounding in her chest. "For now," he replied, his tone grave. "But we can't stay here." Clara felt panic rising again, but Griffin placed a firm hand on her shoulder. "We need to move tonight." As dawn broke, Clara emerged from their hiding place, the remnants of fear still clinging to her. Her children clutched close, hearts racing. They began to gather what little they could carry. Outside, the world was tinged with a fresh sense of danger. The remnants of the battle lay strewn across their home like unwelcome ghosts. Clara turned to Griffin. "Where do we go?" "I know a place," he said, his eyes narrowing, weighing his options. "It's out of town, but it's safe." And so they did. Clara climbed onto a horse, gripping her children tightly, determination coursing through her. The sun was just creeping over the horizon as they galloped away from danger, adrenaline mixed with fear thundering through her veins. Days turned into nights as they ran, fear morphing into survival instincts. They found an old cabin deep in the woods, hidden from prying eyes. It felt like an uncertain sanctuary. Under the thicket of trees, Clara set up a temporary home, drawing on her own resourcefulness to forage for food while Griffin kept watch. As they settled in, Clara began to teach her children about resilience, the importance of standing together in the face of adversity. Griffin became more than just a protector. He became a father figure, teaching Eli how to shoot and Mary how to be brave. Together, they built a life in their refuge, slowly regaining a sense of normalcy. One evening, as they gathered around a small fire, Clara felt a sense of camaraderie blossom around them, a feeling of safety she hadn't dared to wish for. They shared stories and laughter, and for the first time since she had lost her husband, she allowed herself to feel hope. But the world was not done with them yet. As the weeks passed, the fear of being discovered weighed heavily on Clara. The raiders were still a threat, lurking outside the edges of their sanctuary like wolves waiting for their chance. They needed a way to break free from that fear to reclaim their lives. One evening, while Griffin was cleaning his gun, Clara took a deep breath. She suggested, her heart racing at the prospect. Griffin asked, looking up sharply. "I mean, we can't keep running. We have to take a stand for our lives, for our home," she replied, fervor in her voice. Griffin studied her, curiosity and respect flashing in his eyes. "I know, but I've lost so much already." "I can't lose any more," she said, conviction burning in her words. After a long moment, Griffin nodded, respect etched deep in his gaze. "All right." And so, with purpose, Clara set forth. She reached out to those who had hidden like her others, weary of living in fear. One by one, they gathered in the little cabin deep in the woods, huddled together in hopes of reclaiming their lives. Days turned into a whirlwind of preparation, crafting weapons, training under Griffin's watchful eye, and instilling courage with every shared story. Clara felt something powerful growing within her, the realization that they were capable of so much more than just surviving. They could fight back. Within the burgeoning group, Clara found herself transforming into a leader. She spoke passionately, igniting hope and a sense of belonging in those around her. Her voice resonated with strength, bringing people together, reminding them that they were not alone. Finally, the time came. When dawn broke, Clara and her makeshift army of brave souls prepared to take the fight back to the raiders. The tension in the air crackled with anticipation. Clara climbed onto her horse, heart roaring in her chest as a sense of purpose washed over her. They rode hard and fast, determined to reclaim their lives. The clash that ensued was fierce and chaotic, a tempest of gunfire, shouts, and a hot rush of anger and resolution. Clara fought alongside Griffin, fear morphing into pure adrenaline as she took her place among the community that had rallied around her. Together, they charged into battle, standing firm against the waves of darkness that threatened to engulf them. Clara could feel her spirit soaring, her children fighting bravely alongside them, believing in their strength. With every shot fired, they pushed back against the devastation that had haunted their lives for too long. As the dust settled, Clara felt a familiar warmth envelop her. They had not only fought, they had won. Together, they had reclaimed their town, their lives, and their sense of safety. The weight of fear began to lift, revealing a landscape filled with newfound hope and resilience. Exhausted but triumphant, Clara searched for Griffin amid the aftermath. She found him standing among the townsfolk, relief etched into his weary face. They locked eyes, and in that moment gratitude flooded her heart. "You did well," he said, the hint of a smile breaking through the remnants of exhaustion. "You too," she replied, realizing the bond they had forged through shared struggle. As the sun dipped low, painting the sky with vibrant colors, Clara felt her heart swell. The laughter of her children echoed around her, blending with the realization that while darkness could rear its head, they now had the strength to face it together. They had carved a path from despair into a bright future. Together, they would embrace every day as a new beginning, a promise that however dark the night, hope could always return on the wings of resilience and love. And as Clara held her family tight, she knew they would face whatever came next as a united front, standing strong, fighting for the life they deserved. A gunshot shattered the stillness of a crisp autumn evening, sending a jolt through Clara's body. She stood frozen on her porch, her heart racing as dread washed over her like a sudden storm. It wasn't just the sound itself that terrified her. It was the realization that the world outside her home had turned into a place of peril. Barely 2 years had passed since her husband had been taken from them, and with every day since, the shadows had grown longer, creeping into her life like silent thieves. She glanced back at her children, Eli and Mary, their laughter ringing out in the yard, innocent and unaware of the danger lurking just beyond sight. The joy in their voices felt like a fragile glass bell, ready to shatter at the slightest disruption. Clara gripped the wooden railing tightly, feeling her resolve strengthen. She could not lose them, not like she had lost him. Eli shouted, waving from the swing set. Mary joined in, spinning around with a giggle. But their happiness was woven tight with the tension that gripped Clara's heart. She knew she had to act, and she needed help, a protector for her children. Without wasting another moment, she turned on her heels, determination propelling her forward. The saloon was her destination, a rough-and-tumble place where men gathered like wolves, and she had heard whispers of a gunslinger rumored to be in town. She could feel anxiety twisting in her stomach, but the urgency of her mission drowned it out. As she entered, the smell of whiskey and sweat hit her like a wave. Conversations dropped to hushed murmurs as the men turned to stare, curiosity mixed with judgment sculpting their faces. Clara felt her heart pound in her chest, but she forced herself to stand tall. "I'm looking for a gunslinger," she stated, her voice steady despite the uncertainty swirling within her. Laughter erupted throughout the room, mocking and harsh. One man jeered. She shot back, the desperation behind her words rising. The men exchanged glances, amusement fading as a deeper voice broke through the noise. Clara turned to see him, the gunslinger Griffin, a figure who seemed to carry the weight of untold stories, his weathered face etched with lines that spoke of hardship. He wasn't young, but something in his presence demanded respect. "I need you to keep my children safe," Clara said, heart pounding in fear and hope combined. Griffin studied her, weighing her desperation against the chaos of the saloon. "Because I can pay," Clara replied, her tone unwavering. A flicker of intrigue appeared in his eyes, and for a fleeting moment Clara saw the humanity buried beneath the jagged exterior. He asked, voice low. "No," Clara said firmly. "I know it's more than that. I'm asking for your trust." After a long moment of contemplation that felt like eternity, Griffin nodded. "All right, I'll take the job." Relief flooded Clara as she exhaled slowly. She had taken a step into uncertainty, inviting a stranger into her chaotic life. But for her children, it was worth it. Days turned into weeks, and Griffin settled into their lives like a silent guardian. He became a fixture in their home, shadowing their every move. Clara was grateful, but also wary of this rugged man who interrupted her solitude. He wasn't just some hired gun. He was a protector, someone who held the power to safeguard her children. Eli took to Griffin like a moth to a flame, leaning into every lesson he was given. Griffin taught him how to handle a gun, how to aim properly, and most importantly, how to respect the weapon. Clara couldn't bear to watch at first, anxiety choking her as her son held a real gun in his small hands. But as the days morphed into weeks, she began to realize that knowing how to defend themselves might be the only way for them to survive in a world that felt increasingly dangerous. Every evening, Clara would catch sight of Griffin outside, sitting solemnly with a faraway look in his eyes, as if he were wrestling with demons only he could see. She felt an instinct to reach out, to know the man behind the gun, but fear held her back. She didn't want to dive into the darkness cloaked around him, fearing it would swallow her whole. Yet one night, finding courage, she approached him as he sat on the porch, the stars casting silver light upon their world. He turned to her, the shadows flickering over his face, revealing the burden he carried. "I've lost too many people." "I understand," Clara replied, feeling her own grief swell. "I've lost my husband." In that moment, something shifted. They were both two souls separated by pain, drawn together in shared understanding. There was a connection forming, fragile yet undeniable. As the days turned into weeks, their bond deepened. Griffin became more than just a protector. He was a part of their lives. Clara began to see glimpses of the man he was beneath the hardened exterior, a man who cared deeply, not just about her children, but about her as well. The warmth of companionship began to replace the isolation she had felt for so long. But just as life began to feel stable again, the storm they had all feared struck without warning. One evening, the wind shifted, carrying with it a sense of foreboding. Clara's heartbeat quickened as she noticed the change in Griffin. He stood with his back rigid, eyes scanning the horizon, alert. "They're coming," he said, his voice barely above a whisper. Panic surged through Clara as she rushed to gather her children. She asked, fear threading through her words. "Stay close," Griffin instructed, urgency in his tone. "Get them to the back." The darkness outside swallowed their home as Clara ushered her children into the small confines of a hidden space beneath the floorboards. She squeezed their hands tightly, heart racing. "Stay quiet, my loves." As silence settled heavily around them, Clara heard the distant sounds of horses and shouting. Her heart raced as she realized the storm was upon them, the chaos of danger creeping closer. In that moment, memories of her husband flooded her mind, the strength he had always brought to her life, now replaced by Griffin's determined presence. Clara whispered, rubbing her children's back soothingly, though her own heart pounded loudly in her chest. She felt Eli's small frame tremble against her. "It's going to be okay," she promised, though the uncertainty clung to her words. Meanwhile, above, the world erupted in chaos. Clara could hear the shouts, the gunfire echoing through the walls like thunder. Her breath caught in her throat and the fear of losing everything tightened around her. Just then, the trapdoor creaked open. Griffin's silhouette loomed above them, his eyes sharp and focused. "Get ready to move," he commanded, but his voice held a calmness that for some reason steadied Clara's rushing thoughts. Mary cried, her little voice breaking through the chaos. "SHH, it's okay," Clara reassured her, squeezing her one last time. "We're going to be just fine." As she prepared to pull her children into the chaos above, they heard the unmistakable sound of heavy boots barging through the door, shouting punctuating the air. Clara's heart dropped into her stomach. Griffin was positioned to intercept. They needed to get out of their hiding place and follow him. Griffin barked, urgency thickening the air. Clara followed his lead, summoning every ounce of courage as she emerged from their hiding place. The chaos that greeted them was nothing like she had imagined. Men filled their home, ruthless figures with eyes that scanned the area with malicious intent. Clara felt fear claw at her throat, but Griffin was there, a steady hand guiding her and her children away from the fray. He urged, leading them toward the back door, keeping his own body positioned between them and the chaos. Eli's voice trembled, eyes wide. "I know it's scary, sweetheart. Just hold my hand tight," Clara said, squeezing his little hand as they pushed their way through the door into the night air, the coolness hitting her face like fresh hope. They dashed into the thick trees that bordered their yard, the haunting sounds of chaos fading behind them, shouts, shattering wood, the shots of guns. Clara's heart raced as they found a small clearing to catch their breaths. Mary asked, her wide eyes reflecting the fear that was mirrored in Clara's own. "For now," Griffin said, his voice firm but also gently reassuring. Just then, Clara pulled her children closer, wrapping her arms around them in a protective embrace. They needed to run to find shelter. The world felt chaotic and dark, but as long as Griffin was by their side, she felt a sliver of confidence. Clara questioned, watching as Griffin scanned the perimeter of the thicket. "There's an old barn a few miles down the road. It should be empty," he replied quickly. With fear still clinging tightly to her, Clara nodded and they began to run again. The journey felt endless, each step echoing like thunder in her ears, but through the suffocating darkness, Clara felt the warmth of her children beside her, that light keeping the shadows at bay. After what felt like an eternity, they finally reached the barn, an old wooden structure that seemed to stand solitary against the darkness of the night. Griffin ushered them inside, closing the doors tightly behind them. Inside, it was dark and musty, but it offered shelter from the dangers that lurked outside. Clara let out a shaky breath, clutching her children closer. Griffin stood by the door, constraints of familiarity melting away as he kept his focus sharp, eyes scanning the area. Clara wondered aloud, heart racing at the thought of what could lie outside. "Until it's safe," Griffin replied, his voice calm but resolute. Time felt elastic, stretching into eternity as they huddled in darkness. Clara glanced at the small faces beside her, their expressions both frightened and trusting. That trust was a fragile thing, but it gave her strength. In that moment of quiet desperation, Clara felt herself wanting to reach out, to thank Griffin for everything he had done for them. He hadn't just stepped into their lives as a protector, he had become a part of their family. "Thank you for keeping us safe," Clara finally said softly, meeting his gaze, and for a brief moment the hardness cracked, revealing a glimmer of warmth in his eyes. "I do what needs to be done," he replied, but there was an unspoken sincerity in his words that echoed deep. As the hours passed, both children began to drift off, exhaustion taking its toll. Clara felt anxiety weighing her down, but she forced herself to breathe, using the rhythmic sound of her children's breaths to ground her. Griffin remained alert, standing guard dedicated to the task of protecting them. Then finally, a sound broke the silence, the unmistakable echo of hooves. Clara's heart raced anew. Had the raiders found them? She opened her mouth to warn Griffin, but he held up a hand, eyes narrowing, signaling for silence. The minutes ticked by, the tension thickening. It was then that Clara noticed the shift in Griffin. His eyes hardened, jaw clenched. The world outside stirred with danger, and she could feel it suffocating them, threatening to close in. "Get ready," he whispered, glancing back. Panic began to grip Clara once more, but she forced it down. They had already faced so much, and she couldn't afford to crumble now, not when her children were depending on her. Finally, the door of the barn creaked open, and Clara felt her breath hitch as the figure stepped inside. To her surprise, it wasn't a raider but a familiar face, one of the neighbors who had heard the gunfire. He shouted, his eyes wide with relief. "I thought you all were in trouble." Clara breathed, relief flooding her as he stepped inside, bringing a piece of home and sanity with him. James's voice shook with urgency. "They're looking for you. We need to move." "No, we can't leave yet," Clara said. "The children, they'll be safe with us," Griffin interrupted, his voice threaded with authority. "You've got to trust me." Clara looked at James, then back at Griffin. For a moment she hesitated, fear battling with the flicker of hope that had begun to grow within her. But there was no time for hesitation. "All right," she said, her heart racing. With that, they ventured back outside, the darkness pouring around them like a thick fog. Clara held her children tightly, heart pounding as they moved cautiously through the night. As they approached the safe house just beyond town, Clara's senses heightened. Every creak of a branch, every whisper of the wind echoed her urgency. They couldn't let their guard down. Not now, not after everything they had been through. Finally arriving at the safe house, they pushed inside, locking the door behind them. The atmosphere felt different, less suffocating, more welcoming. Clara took a deep breath, finally allowing herself to feel the warmth of safety wash over her. But the war wasn't over. In the days that followed, while Griffin and James helped fortify their defenses, Clara became a pillar of resilience. She learned to set traps, gather food, and create a sense of normalcy out of chaos. Each day felt like a relentless battle, but she faced it with a fierce determination fueled by the love for her children. In the mornings, she would take Eli and Mary outside to practice with the guns, teaching them to hold them like weapons, not toys. With each lesson, she saw not only their ability to protect themselves grow, but a fire of resilience igniting inside their hearts, a promise that they would not go down without a fight. One fateful afternoon, as they trained in the yard, Clara noticed movement in the distance. Her heart raced as she caught sight of dark figures on horseback. The raiders were back. She screamed, adrenaline surging through her veins as she ushered her children inside the safe house. Griffin and James rushed to her side, weapons drawn. "We'll handle this," Griffin said, determination in his eyes. Clara shouted, fear knotting in her stomach. "They won't," Griffin assured her, chin lifted with defiance. As the men approached, Clara's heart hammered. She could feel the weight of their approach, each thunderous hoofbeat echoing like death's knell. The raiders dismounted, towering figures cloaked in malice. Clara's breath caught as they stepped forward, vicious smiles twisting their lips like snakes ready to strike. But there was no way she would let fear rule her anymore. Clara rose to her full height, fury igniting within her. She yelled, the strength of her conviction resonating. With a roar, Griffin lunged forward, meting out justice with fierce precision while Clara directed her children to stay back. The fight erupted, a whirlwind of motion and noise, shots ringing and cries echoing through the air blending with their own. Clara tried to keep her children calm, urging them to remain hidden. But inside, she felt the tempest of fear transforming into something else, a raw, unyielding determination feeding off the knowledge that she would protect her children with her last breath. Gunfire erupted, and Clara forced herself to watch as Griffin and James fought against the odds. The raiders fell one by one, but she could see the intensity in Griffin's eyes, the raw passion fueling his every move. Clara shouted to her children, her own voice trembling but resolute. Finally, the battle turned in their favor, the raiders retreating into the darkness, leaving only silence in their wake. Clara collapsed, tears of relief streaming down her face as she gathered her children into her arms. Mary gasped, eyes wide with astonishment. "We survived," Clara whispered, tears spilling freely as she did her best to hold onto the moment. Griffin and James approached, breathless but unbroken. "We did what we had to do," Griffin said quietly, allowing Clara to catch a glimpse of the man behind the gun. Together they had faced the darkness and emerged victorious. As the sun began to rise, painting the sky with hues of gold and orange, Clara felt hope soaring within her. They had fought hard, and together they had come out stronger. Everything they had faced, the love they had built, had forged something unbreakable, a family. A bond forged in the fires of chaos, tempered by determination and resilience. And as they stood there, bound together by the scars of survival, Clara knew that they would face whatever came next as a united front. Together, they would embrace the dawn, ready to reclaim their lives with open hearts and unyielding spirits. The wind howled through the narrow canyons, carrying with it the clang of metal and the shouts of men. Clara stood frozen in her doorway, heart racing as her children, Eli and Mary, played just beyond the reach of her fraying sanity. The sun was setting, casting long shadows that slipped into her home, darkening the corners and whispering threats that settled heavily in the air. Then came the unmistakable crack of gunfire. It echoed like thunder in the distance, sending a chill down her spine. Heart racing, Clara turned to look at her kids, who were now staring at her wide-eyed. Each laugh and giggle faded into silence, replaced with realization they were no longer safe. "Mommy," Eli whimpered, his small voice shaking. Clara rushed to gather them in her arms, squeezing them tight as if her love could shield them from the world outside. "Stay close to me," she whispered, her mind racing. How far were the raiders? Would they come here? Clara had heard the stories, the gangs that swept through towns like locusts, taking whatever they wanted, leaving destruction in their wake. She had fought to keep the spirit of her home alive, but now it felt like the walls were closing in. With each heartbeat, her thoughts turned to one desperate realization: she needed help. Without thinking, she rushed toward the town. The saloon would be her destination, the wild place where men often gathered. As she sprinted forward, a surge of anxiety gripped her throat. What kind of man would step in to protect a widow and her children? She could only hope someone in there would understand the urgency in her heart. The saloon doors swung open, and a wave of raucous laughter washed over her. The smell of whiskey and smoke mixed harshly in the air, and the room hushed as men turned to gawk at her. She felt every eye assess her, some with curiosity, others with disdain. Clara stood her ground, purpose burning in her core. She yelled, her voice rising above the low murmur. The laughter transformed into incredulous stares. One man scoffed, his voice dripping with mockery. "To protect my children," Clara replied, her chest rising with determination. The incredulity morphed into laughter again, echoing loudly around the room, but she didn't back down. Suddenly, silence fell once more as a tall figure from the back emerged, a man with a reputation, they whispered. Griffin, his eyes, a piercing blue, held a mix of world weariness and intrigue. He drew nearer, curiosity dancing in his gaze. He inquired, voice gravelly tinged with skepticism. "I need you to keep my children safe. There are raiders coming," Clara implored, her heart pounding against her ribs. He studied her intently, weighing her words against the harsh reality of their world. "And why should I risk my life for you?" "It's not just money," she interrupted. "I'm asking for your trust." After a tense moment, Griffin nodded slowly. "All right, I'll take the job." "Yes," Clara breathed, a wave of relief flooding her. She had opened a door into darkness, inviting a stranger into her home, but it was a risk she was now willing to take. It was a matter of days before Griffin moved into their lives like an unwavering shadow. He became not only a protector but an unyielding fixture in their home. Clara felt a mix of gratitude and uncertainty. What kind of man had she invited in? As the days wore on, she watched as he became a mentor to both Eli and Mary. He taught them how to handle firearms, how to aim, how to shoot, but more importantly, he taught them the responsibility that came with that power. Clara stood back, torn between fear and admiration, as she watched the lessons unfold. "Think of it like this, Eli," Griffin explained one afternoon. "Every bullet has a purpose." Clara felt proud when she saw their growing confidence, and yet the weight of fear lingered, a constant companion gnawing at her thoughts. Each night, Griffin would retreat to the porch, staring out into the looming darkness, eyes narrowed as if waiting for a storm to gather. One evening, unable to hold her curiosity any longer, she stepped outside to join him. "Just the moon," he replied, but the tension in his voice told her more than his words did. She asked, taking a seat beside him, her heart racing. "Fear is a natural state," he said, voice low, "but it's how you respond to it that defines you." They sat in silence, the weight of their shared experiences drawing them closer. Slowly, the bond they were building grew more profound, and Clara found herself leaning on him, not just as a protector, but as someone who understood loss. Just when life began to take on some semblance of normalcy, the storm they had feared finally struck. One night, Clara heard the telltale sounds of galloping hooves echoing through the quiet town. Her heart dropped, and she rushed to the window, breath hitching as she spotted dark figures in the distance. She shouted, panic spilling over as she called for him. He appeared almost instantly, urgency etched across his face. Griffin barked, confirming her worst fears. "Move the kids." Clara wasted no time. She grabbed Eli and Mary, urging them inside the house. Panic shot through her veins as the reality of the moment sank in. She could hear the chaotic sounds growing closer, shouting, laughter, the clink of weapons being readied. She smiled weakly at her children, even as fear clawed at her insides. Griffin moved with purpose, securing doors and windows, positioning himself to intercept the threat. Clara felt a cold shudder of fear. Would this man, this stranger, do what her husband could not? Mary whimpered, trembling against her side. "I know, sweetheart," Clara whispered, gathering Mary close, determination settling in her bones. The front door crashed open and the air erupted with mayhem. Clara grabbed her children, pulling them behind her as figures broke into their home, wild with intent. Griffin stood ready, defending them with steely resolve as he faced the chaos. "Them out," he shouted, but her heart was pounding so loudly she struggled to understand, to comply. A raider stepped forward, grinning wickedly, and Clara felt rage ignite within her as panic transformed to fury. She yelled, clutching her children close. Griffin surged forward, engaging the raiders with lethal precision. Clara's heart raced while she clung to her kids, watching the chaos unfold. She felt like time slowed, stretching each moment into infinity as the danger swirled around them. Griffin shouted, pulling back to ensure Clara and the children remained hidden, a barrier of protection forged from instinct and determination. The sounds of chaos erupted all around as Clara felt her grip tighten around her children, fear transforming into something desperate and fierce within her. As Griffin fought, she made the decision to act, to protect what was hers. "Trust me," she told Eli as she positioned them closer to the entrance. "Okay, Mom." His voice was shaky, but he nodded. As the battle raged on, Clara felt herself calming. She glanced at Griffin, his incredible focus and anchor amid the storm. Then suddenly, the door slammed open again, and another batch of raiders stormed in, brutish and hungry. Clara yelled, raising her voice above the chaos as she sheathed her children's hands, urging them forward. She never could have imagined the strength that surged in her, but it was there, raw and fierce. They dashed out into the night, Clara's heart pounding as they fled into the dark. The sounds of chaos began to die behind them, the cries of battle trailing into silence as they raced down the dirt path. Eli panted, fear evident in his voice just as Clara stopped short. She urged, adrenaline fueling her as they continued into the woods, away from the chaos that had threatened to swallow them whole. As they stumbled deeper into the trees, Clara took stock of her surroundings, desperate and fearful. The darkness enveloped them completely. The only sounds were the rustle of leaves and the heavy breaths of her children. Mary asked, voice trembling. She squeezed her mom's hand tighter, and Clara wanted nothing more than to reassure her, but a nagging fear held her tongue. "I don't know," Clara admitted, her heart sinking as they pressed further into the unknown. Just then a movement caught Clara's eye, a shadow flitting between the trees, right behind them. She shouted, panic surging anew as she urged her children forward. They burst into a clearing and Clara's heart sank. There was no sign of Griffin anywhere. She ordered, her voice firm against the encroaching darkness. But then, to her horror, she turned to look behind her. The dark figure emerged from the trees, a glint of metal flashing in the moonlight. A raider was pursuing them, eyes wild with malice. Eli screamed, terror overtaking him as he realized too late what was happening. Clara shouted, feeling the world spin as adrenaline coursed through her veins. They had to move, but her legs felt like lead. Suddenly she heard the thud of hooves. Griffin burst into the clearing, a sight of fierce determination as he barreled forward. He bellowed, eyes fierce as he rushed to confront the raider. Clara's heart soared as she turned, realization washing over her. They were not alone, not anymore. They could fight back. Griffin leaped into action, confronting the raider with the skill of a seasoned gunslinger, gunshots echoing in the quiet night. Clara dashed toward the horses, heart racing, adrenaline pumping. Griffin shouted, his voice cutting through the chaos. But Clara hesitated, watching the fierce battle unfold. The raider swung a fist, lunging toward Griffin, who dodged like a dancer, returning fire and taking down the threat. In that moment of confrontation, Clara felt the weight of the decision crashing over her. They could either run or they could fight. Clara ordered as she grabbed the reins of a horse, determination flooding her veins. With a swift movement, she climbed onto the horse, calling her children to follow. Quickly, the moment was a blur. Eli and Mary managed to jump onto the horse behind her, and Clara felt the pulse of panic settle deep inside her. Griffin charged forward, his sharp eyes catching hers for just a moment. He shouted, a fire in his voice that left her breathless. With that, Clara spurred the horse forward, heart pounding as they raced into the woods, the sounds of chaos receding behind them. But Clara couldn't shake the feeling of dread that curled in her gut. As they galloped away from the chaos, Clara turned to look back one last time. Griffin's figure grew smaller against the rising chaos, but the fire in his eyes held a promise, the promise that he wouldn't let them down. Clara shouted, urging the horse onward, the weight of uncertainty hanging heavy in the air. With every beat of the horse's hooves, adrenaline surged through her, a raw, relentless energy, chasing them into the unknown. But the danger had not receded. It felt like a shadow, creeping further into the night, ready to snatch at her family once more. As they rode further into the wilderness, Clara's heart raced with uncertainty, every instinct telling her that safety was an illusion, one that could slip away at any moment. As they forged deeper into the night, Clara wondered if the price of safety was going to be too steep. Had they made the right choice in escaping? What lay ahead for them? But one thing was clear: whatever came next, they would face it together. Would they see Griffin again? With every passing moment, the question echoed in her mind, the suspense building like a pressure cooker, threatening to explode. As they galloped further into the unknown, the light of dawn began to peek through the trees, illuminating their path forward, but also casting shadows behind them, a reminder of the danger that still lurked close by. The ride into the night was just the beginning of a journey that would test Clara's courage in ways she could never have imagined. And as the dawn broke, she felt the weight of uncertainty settle on her shoulders, a reminder that the fight was far from over. What awaited them on this uncharted path? Only time would reveal the answers. But for Clara, one thing was certain. She would do whatever it took to protect her children, even if it meant facing the darkness alone.